Shalom Aleichem, Erev Shalom Aleichem, Erev Shalom Aleichem, Erev Shalom, Shalom, Shalom Aleichem.
A poem for Torah on Simchat Torah. Each time, and each year, we read the ancient words, burrowing into the empty spaces between those words, feeling the wonder there, letting them sink into us as we become one with them, resting ever more deeply this year in each line, each phrase, each word, sinking into them and held mesmerized in their embrace. The profound, the expansive meanings wash over us, in us, and through us, giving us a new glimmer of understanding, speaking to us of our ancient selves and of the life of our present heart. This year, may more of the secrets be unlocked. This year, may we fall into them and be caught there, enveloped by their cosmic wisdom, held more deeply than ever before.
Since we can't celebrate in person this year, we will rejoice in images from past years, enjoy some music, and we'll take a guided tour of our entire Torah. So clap your hands, tap your feet, sing along, or just sit back and relax.
שבת אחים גם יחד, ידעי רעי,
This is what it means to be a Jew, not only to wrestle with Torah, not only to study and argue with Torah, but to dance with Torah, to dance with our story. The last letter of the Torah is Lamed, and the first letter is Vet. And when we put them together, end to beginning, we have Lev, which means heart. The Torah is at the heart of who we are. And even when our hearts are broken, we embrace our story, we embrace each other, and we dance.
So one of our traditions has always been, first we march with the Torah a little, and then we undress one of our Torahs and we begin to unroll. And as everybody's sitting in a circle, everyone gets their own little share of Torah.
So now let's start our journey and learn a little Torah. We'll start with a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So here we're seeing the very beginning of the Torah scroll. The first book of the Torah is called Bereshit in Hebrew. And it starts in the section we see here. It starts with the description of the days of creation. And each day, God is adding another aspect of creation, from light to land to water to animals and so on. On the sixth day, God creates mankind, human beings. Bereshit says that God creates man and woman, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And then on the seventh day, God rests. And from here, we get the idea of Shabbat, a day of rest, after the rest of the week is done, and we've spent a long week working and creating. We rest. All this is just embodied, even just in the first chapter of Bereshit. But Bereshit continues, and it has many stories that we're familiar with. Early in the book, there's the story of Noah and the flood, after which God promises never to destroy the world again. Later, we're introduced to Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Rachel and Leah, and Joseph. God tells Abraham, when his name is still Avram, to go to the land where he will become a great nation. His name is changed to Abraham, and he marries Sarai, who changes her name to Sarah. They have their son Isaac. Isaac marries Rebekah, and they have twin boys, Jacob and Esau. Jacob grows up and marries Rachel and Leah and returns to the land and has 12 sons and a daughter. We hear the story of one of the sons of Jacob, who's Joseph. Joseph's brothers are very envious of him, and they sell him to traders, and he goes to Egypt. But Joseph later, while he's in prison, he interprets Pharaoh's dreams and becomes a leader. The brothers later come to Egypt because of a famine, and after some time they reconcile, and all the family goes to Egypt. Now in the next image, we'll see the end of the first book, Bereshit. So here's the end of the book. We summarized the main stories that are in Bereshit, but here we see the end of the book. There's actually a section in the text with a large space, a large empty gap. So what does this mean? This is the end of one book and the beginning of another. So remember the Torah, we call them books, but the Torah is a scroll. So this is how we indicate where one book ends and the next one begins. This is the end of Bereshit, and the next book is Shmot, or Exodus. And now Shmot, or Exodus, has many important sections. The people of Israel are in Egypt, but we learn there that there arises a new Pharaoh that did not know Joseph and did not know Israel. He's afraid of the people, he's afraid of them growing in number, and he makes them slaves. The Pharaoh then commands all the newborn males to be killed, but when Moses is born, he is hidden in a basket, and he's placed in the waters, where he's found by the daughter of Pharaoh. Moses grows up in the house of the Pharaoh, but he gets in trouble and he flees. He flees Egypt, and he ends up in Midian. In Midian, that's where Moses has his first encounter with God, and we read about that in the book of Shmot. The name of God is revealed to him, and God tells Moses to go back to Egypt and tell the Pharaoh, "Let my people go. They should no longer be slaves." Of course, we know the story. Pharaoh refuses to free the people of Israel, and God demonstrates his power with 10 plagues. Israel holds their first Passover celebration, and they flee Egypt. But we also know Pharaoh chases them out of Egypt, and there is a miracle at the Red Sea, where the sea splits, the people are able to pass through, but the sea closes on the Egyptians. And when we get to the next image, we'll see that part of the text.
Let's sing a little. We were singing before Hine Matov in a bouncy fashion. The words are about how good it is for us to sit together, brothers and sisters. Hine Matov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine Matov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad. These are our Torahs. These are the Torahs that we hold dear and sacred. And earlier this year, we had the privilege of having a sofer come to inspect our Torahs, tell us what they need in the way of repair, and what the history possibly could be. So stay tuned, because as we move through this, you're going to learn about each of our 3 Torahs, where they come from, how old they are, and a little bit of information about what we're going to do to bring them up to code. Our first Torah that we'll talk about is that large Torah that you saw, and we have it pictured here. We call that, the nickname is the heavyweight. That's our big Torah. This was written in good Bet Yosef script. So the script is the font, the style in which it's written. Good doesn't mean great. It just means good, better than bad. This Torah is about 50 to 60 years old, and the style of writing is attributed to a sofer likely from Israel. Vav is a Hebrew letter. You can see it in black on your screen, and it has a numerical value of 5. And this is called a Vav scroll because nearly every column begins with the letter Vav. The front and the back of the parchment is glazed, and That's an interesting story unto itself, why we glazed the parchment. So you'll just have to come back next year to find out about glazing. This Torah is a bissel schmutzidik, as my mom used to say. It's schmutzy, and it needs a good bit of cleaning before repairs are done. We did start working on that. Many of you helped me with that. And when we were able to get out of quarantine, we'll finish.
Tumbalala, tumbalala, tumbalalaika, tumbalala, tumbalala, tumbalalaika, tumbalalaika, spielbalalaika, tumbalalaika, freilich.
And here, in this image here, this is the portion of the book of Shemot or Exodus, which is called the Song of the Sea. We mentioned that Israel escaped Egypt and they were able to pass through the sea, but the sea closed on the Egyptians. When Israel is saved, Moses sings this song called in Hebrew Shir Shel Yam, or Song of the Sea. It's right here in this image, and you could see how it's organized in the text. It's a very different approach. It's done kind of a block style, and it really stands out, right? This part of the Torah here really stands out compared to the rest of the narrative, and it really emphasizes the importance of the text. It's not just the narrative, but this is a moment of intense joy, the intense joy of being saved. It's the moment when Israel is free. And when we get to the next image, we'll see what comes after the Song of the Sea later in Shemot, which will be the 10 Commandments. It's right here. So here we know this, we're familiar with this part of the Torah. After escaping the sea, escaping the Egyptians at the sea, Israel continues to travel in Sinai, and they end up at Mount Sinai, where they make a covenant with God. And part of this covenant is embodied in the 10 Commandments right here. This is the moment in the Torah when while earlier we saw that Moses had his encounter with God, here it's the whole people having an encounter with God. The 10 Commandments are here. We're familiar with the commandments, starting a little bit further up in the image. I am the Lord, and shall not have gods before me. You should not make a graven image, and do not take God's name in vain. Keep the Sabbath. Honor your father and mother. You should not murder. You should not commit adultery, steal, bear false witness, or covet your neighbor's possessions. Right here, the 10 Commandments. And when we get to the next image, we'll see the end of this book, end of Shemot, in the beginning of the next one.
Our second Torah is our medium weight Torah. This was written in nice Beit Yosef script, and it's about 100 years old. Comes from Deutschland, from Germany. This Torah has 42 lines per column, and I believe our first Torah had that as well. The back of the scroll on this is glazed, but not the front. This Torah absolutely needs some repair work, and it's also schmutzy. So once we come together in person again, you know what we're going to do. We're going to clean the Torah. And then we'll hire a sofer. He'll come back and do our repairs for us.
And here we are at the next image of the Torah. We're making our way through the scroll. We see another gap in the text here, and like we saw before, this is the end of one book and the beginning of another. So here, this is the end of the second book, Shemot or Exodus, and the beginning of the third book, Vayikra, also called Leviticus. The rest of the book of Shemot included the episode of the golden calf and laws for building the Mishkan, or the tabernacle that they had in the desert. The next book, Leviticus or Vayikra, it consists of many laws for Israel, laws for the priesthood. There are laws of sacrifices, and there's the anointing of Aaron as the first high priest. But there's also a focus in this book of how Israel can be a holy people. There are laws of kashrut, laws of the holidays, laws of purification, and laws of how to manage the land. And there's also one very important law in 3 simple words that I think is one of my favorite lines in the Torah. I think it still rings true today. It's very simple. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You should love your neighbor as you love yourself. And when we get to the next image, we'll see the beginning of the next book. And here it is, again, another space in the text. This is the end of Vayikra, the 3rd book, and the beginning of the 4th book, Bamidbar, also called Numbers. So Bamidbar has a number of important sections to it. There's a census taken of Israel. We also find in Bamidbar the text of the priestly blessing, sometimes called the Birkat Kohanim. There are descriptions of what happens to Israel as they wander in the desert. And there are lots of things that happen. You know, as you might expect, a lot of people in the desert, they complain about food. They want to know where they're going, so they send spies to the land to see what is there. They complain a bit more, and there's actually a rebellion against Moses at one point. There's a portion where the people are crying out for water, and Moses kind of gets frustrated too. He's told by God to speak to the rock, but instead of speaking to the rock, what does he do? He hits the rock. Water comes out, but he has disobeyed God. And we learn that by not listening to God in that moment, he won't be allowed to enter the land. In one of the next images, we'll see what we'll focus on the priestly blessing in Bamidbar.
Tumbalala, tumbalala, tumbalalaika, tumbalala, tumbalala, tumbalalaika.
This is our 3rd Torah, and it was written in a very beautiful, nice Bet Yosef script, also from Germany. And as we said in the old country, when somebody, has a birthday, we say, bis 120. And this Torah has arrived. It is 120 years old. The parchment on this is really in beautiful shape. It's not schmutzy. That's one of the great things. We won't have to clean this. But some of the parchment segments are coming a little loose. So those are going to be stitched back into place when we get our sofer. And those are our 3 Torahs. It's going to be exciting when we can rededicate them.
Hashem Tzion, Urebet Yerushalayim. Yivrechecha Hashem Tzion.
And here is the end of the 4th book, Bamidbar, and the beginning of the final book, Devarim, or Deuteronomy. The last book, the 5th book of the Torah, this is Moses' last speech to Israel before they entered the land. And they are told to follow mitzvot. And they're reminded of many commandments, including the 10 Commandments, which is repeated later in this book. There are a number of other important texts that come out of Devarim, which we'll see in a future image, including the Shema and the Ahavta. And there's also a section towards the end of the book, where each tribe is blessed. And soon we'll get to the next image. And yes, here we see towards the right side of the image, again, the repetition of the 10 Commandments. The commandments are still there in the same order. And then on the left side, and I think we'll get a zoom later, left side, you can kind of see the portion of the Shema. You'll see the portion of the Shema there with kind of in the middle of the column on the left, where the Shema has kind of an enlarged ayin, and the end of that line, Echad, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. The end of the line has a large daled, and those 2 letters together, the ayin and the daled, spell aid or witness. And soon, I think we'll see a close-up of that image as well.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu.
So here we see the Shema again. As we said, it starts in the middle, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. The Shema is kind of a cornerstone of our liturgy today. Even in the short sections, there are laws that come out of it, including the law of the mezuzot and tefillin.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu.
And in this, now we're getting towards very close to the very end of the Torah scroll. This is the second to last portion of the Torah, and it's called Ha'azinu. And this is the end of Moses' last speech to Israel. And he talks about, it's actually a bit of a rebuke. So it's a reminder to Israel to remain faithful. And you'll notice this text is emphasized, as we saw in other places, by having a different organization in the columns. The columns are split, and it's done there for emphasis. And here we come to the very end of the Torah. This is the last paragraph, and it describes the death of Moses and establishes Joshua as the leader from here. And when we would read this in a synagogue, we would read the last portion on Simchat Torah today, and we are usually standing as the last portion of the Torah is read. And when we come to the very end, we stand and we say, Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazek. Strong and strong, 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 and we will be stronger. And I should add one more comment. You might notice what looks like a tear. In fact, at the bottom of the image, that is not a tear. That's just an artifact of the image.
When we have concluded unrolling the Torah and we've taken our tour of Torah, then it's up to our holy rollers, pardon our pun, to bring the Torah back to the very beginning, so that on Shabbat, our next Shabbat, we will be reading Bereshit. In the beginning, God created the universe. How lovely is this? And we're done. The last little bits get unrolled or rolled back up. We celebrate. Remember when we could hug on each other and enjoy each other's company? Oh, those were the days.
From year to year and generation to generation, we sing and dance and rejoice with the Torah. From the end to the beginning, from Kol Yisrael to Bereshit, our journey continues. The words of Torah root us in our past, present, and future. The letters sing to us, engaging our senses, our spirits, our ancestors. And the spaces between the words vibrate, inviting us to remember and to interpret, beckoning us to wrestle once again. From year to year and generation to generation, we sing and dance and celebrate the Torah, from Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazek to Bereshit, we joyfully begin again.
We are so joyful that we were able to spend Erev Simchat Torah with all of you. There are no words to say how, adequate words, I guess, to say how sad we are that we can't be there with you. We hope you enjoyed your tour through Torah, our celebration. We want to we want you to know how much we value you. We admire your strength, your courage to continue on, to celebrate all the Chagim. And soon, we hope we will all come back together. Let's sing our way out. Shalom Chaverim.
Shalom Chaverim, Shalom Chaverim, Shalom, Shalom, Lehitraot, Lehitraot, Shalom.